しびれさせちゃうわよ。ちょっとビリビリさせないとね。
Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about Lisa, who is one of the most underrated characters in Genshin Impact and one who's gotten a lot better with the release of Dendro and its reactions. In fact, while Lisa isn't a game-breaking unit, the fact that she's a free-to-play and pretty versatile option in Dendro teams, as well as a few others that we'll talk about, makes her a character who is definitely deserving of a guide, especially now that she has a new skin, which means more people are going to want to play her. In fact, I've been wanting to make this for a while now, but it feels like the perfect moment for me to explain to you guys why I believe she's underrated and when she can be a strong or viable option, as well as covering the best ways to build and play her. Because of that, we have a lot of things to cover in this video, but first I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, let's get into it. Alright, so starting things off, let's actually talk about what Lisa does and why she's underrated. In fact, I'd say a wide majority of players don't really know how to use or what Lisa actually does, which is partially why I'm making this video. While as I said, she isn't game breaking and there are really powerful electro supports that you can use like Fischl, Beto, or Yai, Lisa has a role because of a few reasons. First of all, she's free to play, which means everyone has her. So since so many of the electro characters and electro reactions now with Dendro are so good, you can want a lot of electro units to use and Lisa can be a viable option. Another reason for this is because of some elements of her kit that make her by default an okay option, like for example her elemental burst, which applies a decent amount of electro, and her passive talent, which will decrease the defense of opponents when your burst hits them. What this means in practice is the following. First of all, since Lisa's best teams are with Dendro, and because of how good the Dendro reactions are, and because of how electro and Dendro proccing the quicken aura actually works, as once you proc quicken by using Dendro and electro, you can then basically apply as much electro as you want to the quicken aura without removing it, which means once you apply Dendro to enemies, you just spam as much electro as you can, and then basically all of your electro damage will be buffed, will proc that aggravate reaction, and just do so much more. Because of that, having off-field supports who can apply a decent amount of electro for a long period of time like Lisa become way more valuable. And pretty much every electro support is so good that while Lisa isn't quite at their level, having a pretty good source of electro through her burst, while also having a pretty unique skill that you can either spam or hold, and being able to use electro auto attacks on field because you're a catalyst user, or being able to use her from off field, gives her that versatility in team comps. Also, and this is probably the most important part, as I mentioned, her passive talent, which decreases defense, is very good as a support ability. In fact, there are very few sources of defense reduction, as it is different to resistance shred, which there are many of, like for example the Verdescent Veneer set or Zhongli's shield. Defense shred doesn't happen very often. Like for example, another source of it that I can think of is going to be Klee's second Constellation, and while this one is 23%, Lisa's is 15%, which isn't that far behind. If that wasn't enough, since this is a passive talent, you don't need any investment to make use of it, and since she's a catalyst, that means you can even run her on very low investment builds like Thrilling Tales, plus her passive, which makes her viable, and even something like a Eula Raiden team, which was the case before the release of Dendro, and now with Dendro she has more team comps where she can shine as an aggravate damage dealer and an electro support. With that said, to give you guys basic information on what she actually does, in case you don't know, well, her burst summons this lightning rose, this sort of lantern that stays on field and constantly deals electro damage to enemies within it. Do note that the burst can also knock back enemies though, but it is pretty weird and inconsistent, and I believe it happens more when they're like airborne, so just do keep in mind that it can knock back enemies, but it doesn't always do it. But in general, it makes up for that with its relatively fast electro application, decent damage, and especially the defense shred from the passive. Lisa's elemental skill is a very unique ability that can either be pressed or held, and honestly both are very viable depending on what you're doing. The way this works is as you press it, it'll apply a stack of conductive status in a small AoE to an enemy as you hit them, and it can stack up to 3 times. Each conductive stack you apply will last for 15 seconds, and you can see how many stacks an enemy has by a number written on them. Do keep in mind that when you use your skill, it will apply at least 1 stack onto them if you press it, but it can actually apply more than 1 at a time sometimes under certain conditions, which are a bit complicated, but I'll cover a bit more in the advanced tips section of this video a bit later. After that, if you use your hold skill, it will deal more damage based on how many stacks the enemies have for a really high scaling at the end. Now in general, charging this ability can be annoying. You can get interrupted, it can take a long time, and also has a long cooldown, but it will also generate 5 electro particles for you, which is a lot of energy, which means it can be worth it if you need energy on your Lisa or just want to deal a decent amount of electro damage, especially when paired with the aggravate reaction. With that said, you can also press this ability a lot. It has a very low cooldown of 1 second, and you can even use like the Thundering Fury artifact set, which we'll talk about later, if you want to really spam her elemental skill as fast as possible. Because of that, for an on-field Lisa, you can really just spam this skill and spam normal attacks and charge attacks to get a ton of electro and a pretty decent amount of damage from from on field, whereas if you need more energy or want to swap out of her, or just want one big hit of electro damage, you can hold her skill and hit everything around you. Both of them are viable, but we'll talk more about this in the combo section and advanced tips later in the video. For now, you need to know that her first few normal attacks, like 1, 2, or 3, are all pretty good, and you can also weave in some charge attacks to apply a bit more electro, as well as to apply a stack of your elemental skill. Lastly, for your talent priority, you should maximize your burst and your skill, primarily your burst, but skill is also pretty important, and then either ignore your normal attacks or level them up if you use her on field. Also, keep in mind that for most Lisa playstyles, especially Dendro team, which is what this video is primarily about, you want to be sure you level her as high as you can, as Dendro reactions scale very highly on your level, so it is important to level her all the way up to 90 if you can, although I'm keeping her 89 to save some resources. Alright, now next up, let's talk about how you actually want to build your Lisa. These next few sections will be split up into mainly 3 parts, explaining how you want to build her if you play her either on field as a driver / carry, off field as a burst support, or as a low investment, pure cheap support option where you use her primarily for defense reduction and other buffs like Three Long Tails. So 3 main playstyles that we'll cover in the build section that all will have different builds. Starting things off, let's talk about the general artifact sets that you're going to be looking for. First of all, since Lisa's best teams are usually to be ran with Quicken, usually spamming Aggravate, when you're on field or off field, the sets you want can vary. For an on field Lisa, 4 Thundering Fury is typically going to be your best in slot, as it increases the damage of your electro reactions while also giving you electro damage bonus and decreasing the cooldown of your elemental skill whenever you proc an electro reaction. Because of that, you can spam your press E really fast on field, making this set usually the best for an on field Lisa. Other good sets for on field that are pretty similar if you have better substats include the 4-piece Gilded Dreams for a ton of elemental mastery, the 4-piece Thunder Soother, especially if you have another electro character and can maintain the electro uptime on enemies for 35% electro damage bonus, or mix and matching 2-piece sets such as Thundering Fury, Noblesse Oblige, Emblem, or a 2-piece of either attack percent or elemental mastery. You should pick whichever one has best substats, with Thundering Fury usually being your go-to for on-field Lisa. For an off-field Lisa build, again in a Dendro team, which is where I believe she's the best and what I am mainly focusing this guide on, you will usually want to go for a 4-piece Gilded Dream set or a ton of elemental mastery on both the 2 and 4-piece, right? If you don't know, it's 50 elemental mastery for every party member with a different element on the 4-piece, and then another 80 on the 2-piece, and for every party member that you may have of the same element. So if you have another electro character, you will gain 14% attack instead, which is still really good on Lisa. So this set overall is just great and usually is your best from off field. Also, if you're playing Lisa for purely her reaction damage in, for example, a Hyper Bloom team, then the Flower of Paradise Lost 4-piece can be her best in slot, but keep in mind that it is still pretty similar in DPS to the 4-piece Gilded Dreams, which you may have already farmed and is more universal. So both of these sets can be viable depending on your substats and what you have. And so while I do typically recommend this, if you're not running a Dendro team and want to run her as a generic burst support from off field with a lot of energy recharge, then 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate can actually be your best in slot, as it will give you 20% ER and then convert 25% of your energy recharge into burst damage. Now with that said, it can still be good in a Dendro team. It's still a good set for your Lisa as you get a lot of damage from your burst, but do keep in mind that Gilded Dreams can overtake it depending on the reactions you're proccing and how much ER you have. Other sets include the 4-piece Thunder Soother if you have enough electro uptime, or the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige if you don't have anyone else on your team that can run it. Lastly, you can mix and match 2-piece sets like the ones I mentioned earlier for an off-field Lisa as well, going with whichever you have that has the best substats. Also, keep in mind that while this can sometimes be your best in slot set, as I said, if you need a lot of energy recharge, as it can give you a ton of burst damage, in teams such as Aggravate or even Electro Charge, when you're proccing a lot of reactions, you can get a lot of electro particles, which can lower how much energy recharge you need and make the set a bit less valuable than the other options, but still is generally a good one depending on how much ER you need. Lastly, if you plan on just running her as a cheap burst support to reduce the defense of opponents, you can run her on either 4 Emblem or 4 Noblesse Oblige, as she can be your Noblesse user, and you will basically just stack energy recharge, as we'll see in the very next section. In fact, with all the sets out of the way for your different playstyles, let's now actually talk about what stats you want on Lisa. Well, generally speaking, for her standard playstyle, when placed in a Quicken / Aggravate team, is going to be, first of all, having enough energy recharge to use your burst on cooldown, and then after that, stacking as much crit as you can, as crit is really good to both your Lisa's personal damage and also to her reaction damage, as the Aggravate reaction does also scale on crit. After that, attack percent and elemental mastery are both really good, with attack being a good general stat and elemental mastery being especially good for your reaction damage. So first things first, let's talk about how much energy recharge you actually need, but do keep in mind that this varies heavily based on how you're playing your Lisa. For example, a Lisa on field will need a very little amount of energy recharge, generally speaking, especially if you run her with another electro support, which you typically will be doing. On top of that, even if you run her off field, while her energy generation may seem terrible if you're not holding your skill that often, if you run her with another electro support, which again you typically will, as Lisa isn't usually used as a solo electro character, as we'll see in the team comp section, then your energy recharge needs won't be that high either, but they can get quite high. Again, this depends on if you're holding your skill or not and how many times you're actually using it and the reactions you're proccing. For some general ranges, I'll put them on screen now, but do keep in mind that it greatly varies, as on field you really don't need a lot, like around 100 130 is a good go-to, and for off-field, you can still need a pretty low amount, like around 150, if you're running her with another electro character and are spamming reactions. Now with that said, what will your main stats actually look like? Well, starting things off, your goblet is going to be electro damage bonus, as this is pretty much always the best, and your circlet is going to be crit rate or crit damage, whichever one you need more of. Do keep in mind, however, that if you plan on using her in a Hyper Bloom team or just for her reaction damage, since that damage will scale only on your elemental mastery as well as your level, then you can stack elemental mastery on every single piece as the main stat you're looking for, alongside some energy recharge. Generally speaking though, I do recommend playing Lisa in a quicken or aggravate team comp, where you can maximize all of your damage at once, both your Lisa's personal damage and her reaction damage, by building crit, electro damage, and either attack percent or elemental mastery on your sands and substats. Also, while attack percent is generally the go-to for your sands, EM, keep in mind, is about as good, so pick whichever one has better substats for you, and EM can sometimes even be better if you're proccing more reactions, such as in a quick bloom team where you're proccing quicken and hyper bloom simultaneously. So overall, her stats may seem a bit complicated, but it's really quite flexible and depends on your playstyle. Standard Lisa build will focus on crit, energy recharge, and then attack and EM when played both on or off field. Lastly, if you just want a generic cheap support to reduce the defense of enemies, then you can just stack energy recharge in every piece and not have to worry about it. Next up, for the weapons you want on Lisa, there's actually a ton of really good options depending on what you have and what you want to use. For a damage dealing Lisa build from either on or off field, pretty much any catalyst that has an offensive stat like crit rate, crit damage, or even elemental mastery or attack percent can all be very valuable given how Lisa can use all of these stats. Because of that, the first thing you need to know is that any offensive 5-star catalyst you may have is going to be a really good option. First of all, Kagura's Verity, which is Yai's signature weapon, is going to be your Lisa's best in slot, generally speaking, as it gives you a ton of crit damage and then will give you more damage whenever you use your elemental skill, which is especially good if you're spamming your elemental skill in something like a quicken / aggravate team. Because of that, you can fully stack this weapon and just deal a ton of damage. Other good options include Nahida's signature, 1000 Floating Dreams, for elemental mastery and a really good effect. Other good 5-stars include Lost Prayer for the crit rate and a passive that gives you buffs when you're on field, and then also the Skyward Atlas for some attack and elemental damage bonus. And also Memory of Dust is okay, especially if you are shielded. Oh, and also Scar's signature is viable, but not the best one. Now, pretty much all of these 5-stars are honestly really good, so if you have any, you should probably use it, with the best ones being Kagura's Verity, followed by Lost Prayers and Floating Dreams. With that said, there are some 4-star options that come close in strength that can even sometimes be better, especially with high refinement, like for example the Widsith, which is a weapon that is especially good on Lisa as it gives you crit damage, and then a passive that gives you 1 of 3 effects that are all good for a Lisa. In fact, you will either get elemental damage bonus, elemental mastery, or attack percent, and assuming you are proccing reactions, then even the elemental mastery one here is good, which means this weapon is pretty much always good for Lisa, assuming you can make use of this 10-second uptime when you swap into her. While this weapon may be a bit harder to use given how you're typically going to be playing Lisa in general, this weapon is just amazing for the stats that it gives you. Other good options include Solar Pearl, which are pretty similar in strength, especially if you are normal attacking, followed by other options like the Mappa Mare, which is free to play, or the Blackcliff Agate if you choose to buy it from the Star Glitter shop. Other niche but viable options I wanted to mention are the Wandering Evenstar, or some EM and a passive that will give you energy, and the Hokushin Ring, which can give you a party-wide damage buff, making it useful if you need the energy recharge. In general though, all of your 5-stars are great, and you have really good 4-star options like Widsith, Solar Pearl, or even the Mappa Mare, which is a free-to-play craftable weapon. Lastly, as a generic cheap support, a weapon that can never go wrong is the Thrilling Tales if you don't want to use her for her damage but want to use her as just a buffing support, as this will give the next character you swap into 48% attack while also having a passive that will reduce the defense of enemies, making her a viable cheap support with this weapon. Another decent support option if you need energy is the Favonius Codex, which is decent and you can still deal okay damage with this weapon, but generally speaking it's not my personal favorite on Lisa, but it has its uses. Alright, now next up, let's talk about some more advanced information regarding Lisa and her best combos, as she is a character that has a lot of different ways to be played and a very nuanced kit with a lot of like weird hidden mechanics. What I mean by that is the following. First of all, you should know that you can animation cancel most things in her kit, like her elemental skill and her charge attacks, by dashing or jumping. I especially recommend this, notably for her elemental skill, as if you press it, you fire a projectile, and then you're kind of locked into an animation, which you can cancel by just, dashing, for example, allowing you to get out of the animation faster and do other things, making it easier to passively stack up your elemental skill by just tapping your E. On a similar note, you typically want to be using your elemental skill, especially if you're spending some on-field time on Lisa, pretty much between everything. If you plan on doing normal attacks, you can do a tap E either before or after your combo, and you can even use it like before your burst. Try to weave it in as often as possible to get stacks of it passively. And so because of that, an on-field Lisa is typically going to be doing combos revolving around normal attack strings, like either 1, 2, or 3, rarely doing 4 as it's worse, and weaving in your elemental skill as often as possible until you have 3 stacks, and then you can hold it, or you can hold it whenever is optimal for you, or if you need energy. The exact moment of when you should hold your skill versus press is kind of weird. Usually you want to have 3 stacks, and you can also use it when you want the energy and when there's a lot of enemies around you. Do be sure though to use your hold skill after using your burst, as the defense reduction production is very important and will significantly increase the damage of your big elemental skill hit when it's fully charged. And another thing to note is that every time you press your skill, it will generate at least one conductive stack, right? This is what I mean when I say you can stack up your skill for its whole damage when you are pressing it. But what's weird and unique is that every time you press, while it will generate at least one conductive stack to the enemies it hits, it can actually generate more, like up to 2 or 3 at a time, but it's very weird and depends on many factors, so typically just assume it's at least one. But if there's a certain formation of enemies, or if you proc a reaction like Overload or Superconduct, or a few other factors, which again are pretty weird and complicated, you can generate more than one conductive stack on a specific unit, so keep that in mind. For more information, I will link a very helpful resource in the description made by Lisa mains and Kaching mains, so be sure to check that for more detailed information. Also, while there are many viable combos with regards to your different types of normal attacks, the typical ones you're going to be doing is 2 normal attacks into an elemental skill, and then you can dash cancel that, or doing 1 normal attack into a charge attack if you want to apply more electro and have a bit more AoE damage. Also, do keep in mind that with the 4-piece Thundering Fury set, how many elemental skills you can press and spam will change, as you basically will get it non-stop off cooldown, which means you can really just spam your skill constantly, making it a really good set for an on-field Lisa and changing your rotation a bit to be more skill heavy. Lastly, if you plan on using her primarily from off-field, you're using her basically just for her burst and the defense shred, so just use that and then swap out. But if you need energy and build her for a bit more damage, you can also hold your skill. Moving on, for Lisa's Constellations, since she's a standard banner character, keep in mind that these are a lot harder to get, as she won't appear on the raid up banners, which most people will be pulling for, but is available in the Star Glitter shop if you choose to get them. With that said, everything I say in this video is applicable to a C0 Lisa, who I believe is underrated, but if you do have Constellations, they can be a pretty nice upgrade, notably her 4th one, which will increase the damage of your lightning rose significantly, unleashing 1 to 3 lightning bolts when it attacks. This makes your burst significantly stronger and is generally going to be her strongest constellation. Now, to go through the other constellations in order, first of all, your first constellation will give you some energy based on the amount of enemies you hit when you hold your skill. This is just pretty decent, but it does vary based obviously on how many enemies you're fighting, so keep that in mind. Your C2 just gives you a bit of resistance interruption, which is a nice quality of life increase, but no increase to your DPS, so not the most appealing one. C3 and 5 are increases to your talents, which are okay for Lisa. And then lastly, your C6 will apply the maximum amount of conductive stacks, 3, to nearby opponents when you swap into her, which means that you can hold the skill as soon as you get onto your Lisa if that's what you choose to do. Generally speaking, you can still follow the same rotations when you use her on field, as you want to be spending time on her and auto attacking anyways. But if you're playing her in a more quick swappy team, or you're using her more from off field, then this is a nice passive, as it means you can use your hold E pretty much as soon as you swap into her for the maximum amount of damage. Overall though, I don't believe Lisa's constellation dependent, but nice ones are primarily her 4th, 6 is cool too, and 2 is a nice resistance interruption that I honestly feel like a lot of people might underrate. It is a nice quality of life upgrade. So overall, these are the 3 nice constellations, but she's perfectly functional at C0, although as I said, her damage will spike a bit with some constellations. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Lisa's best teams, when you should be using her to get the most value out of her character. Well, generally speaking, as I said, she got a big buff with Dendro and the new Dendro reactions, so a lot of these teams are going to be Dendro focused. First of all, quicken teams where you can proc either aggravate or spread, typically aggravate for an electro carry like Lisa, are ones where she could either be a good off-field support option as a decent electro applier and damage dealer, or a pretty strong on-field option if you need someone to spend time on field, apply as much electro as possible, and enable your off-field supports to also deal good damage. And so in these quicken based teams, you're going to pair Lisa with a Dendro support, the best one usually being Nahida, but other Dendro options can also be really good, like Yao Yao, who can be a good 2-in-1 Dendro applier and healer, especially in a quicken team. If you don't have either of these though, the main character is a great option, so don't worry, pretty much anyone can make a quicken team with Lisa. After that, you usually want another electro option to help your Lisa get energy back really fast, as it can be difficult to get Lisa's burst back, especially from off field if you're not holding your E too often, and having another electro battery really helps, while also giving you good damage and also, and especially, being able to aggravate themselves as well, as for example, if you're running 2 electro characters with 1 Dendro, both of them can proc aggravate constantly, increasing both of their damage, and also benefiting from the last slot, like for example, electro resistance shred, or an anemo support that can buff both of them. So generally speaking, 2 electro characters, and you also get obviously the electro resonance for even more energy, which in my opinion is really valuable. Do keep in mind though that the slots in all of these teams are very flexible. As I said, Dendro option is, but so is the electro. You can use Fischl, Beidou, Yaimiko, or Kuki as good off-field options, or you can even use an on-field one such as Kaching, potentially Raiden, or even Sino as a pretty good aggravate carry with Lisa as an off-field support. Because of that, there are very flexible options, flexible teams for a quick and Lisa build, but she does work well either from off-field or from on-field, depending on what you want to do. The last slot is incredibly flexible. Good options include someone like Zhongli for a shield, replacing a healer slot, and also resistance shred, decreasing the resistance of enemies to every element, making him quite valuable. Other good options include an anemo option like Kazuha or Sucrose if you don't need a healer and can run an offensive option, or a 2-in-1 healer and anemo buffer like Jean can also work if you want the healing. Other good options include a hydro applier, ideally a slow one like Kokomi or Barbara, who can heal you and also not apply too much hydro to where you can proc quicken and hyper bloom at the same time without losing too many quickens. If you run a fast hydro applier instead, while it can still be a good team, do note that you'll be procking more hyper blooms and less quickens. You might lose out on some aggravates as you'll apply a lot of hydro, but the team will still definitely work and your last stock can be flexible, but typically another electro option is what you're gonna go for. I know I've talked really fast, but I just want to cover all of these archetypes without talking for too long, and I hope this is a good overview of what a Dendro Lisa team can look like, as there are quite a bit of good options, either using your Lisa on field or pairing her with a DPS like the ones that I mentioned, Kaching, Sino, even Alhaitham, and using her as an off-field support. Lastly, outside of Dendro teams, I want to mention that you can use her as a really good low investment option in a Eula Raiden team, which is the one team where I would recommend Lisa before Dendro came out, as you'll get her burst back on cooldown thanks to Raiden Shogun's burst giving you energy and the energy recharge that you'll stack on her, and then her burst will reduce the defense of opponents, which will greatly buff both of your hyper carries being Eula and Raiden Shogun, making her honestly a great option at this team, even if you leave her low level on a Thrilling Tales with no good artifacts. As long as she has her passive talent unlocked and you have Thrilling Tales on her, she will be useful. Lastly, I also wanted to mention an Electrocharge team can actually work. A Taser Lisa team is honestly not bad, and while there can be some better options in these teams, running Lisa as your driver, the on-field auto attacker, to apply Electro and enable your off-field supports such as Beto or Fischl, Xingqiu or Yelan, and then an Anemo option like Kazuha can honestly make for a pretty strong team given how good Taser is just in general. With that said, my favorite Lisa teams where I believe she's an underrated option, not meta defining, but just underrated and good option for every player, is a Quicken or Aggravate team, which is what I am going to demonstrate in the showcase coming up next. I'm going to be using my Lisa, who is on the Witsith, R5 on the 4-piece Thundering Fury to spam her skill. Currently, these are the stats that I have. A pretty decent Lisa with relatively low energy recharge, but I do make up for that with the team I'm running. Her talents are level 9, which may seem low, but since most people don't have Lisa Constellations as they are rare, I didn't want to make this too unrelatable. I am C6, as with every 4-star character. I would deactivate them if I could, but anyways, it shouldn't make too much of a difference for the showcase, so I hope you enjoy the Lisa footage, and let's get into the showcase.
Surrender and be gentle. You're in for a little shock. Come a little closer. You're in for a little shock. You've been a naughty boy. Let's swap things up a little. Come a little closer. Come a little. You're in for a little shock. Come a little. Shadow Raven. You're in for a little shock. Odds reveal. Surrender and be gentle. Come a little closer. Let's spark things up a little. You're in for a little shock. Come a little closer. You've been a naughty boy. Try not to enjoy this too much. You're in for a little shock. Blitz. You're in for a little shock. Come a little closer. You've been a naughty boy. Surrender and be gentle. Come a little closer. Wings of darkness. Blitz. Let's spark things up a little. You're in for a little shock.
As you wish, main Fräulein.
And so yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed a honestly very detailed Lisa guide as a character who I believe deserved it. While as I said, there are some better Electro characters overall that are like game breaking like Fischl, Lisa is a good option that I believe is one of the most underrated characters, as she usually isn't even considered as a viable option in many different Dendro teams where she's honestly decently strong, especially as a free-to-play option, while also being a decent cheap support in something like a Eula team. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and if there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment. Feel free to ask any questions or leave any feedback, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.